Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show here on Channel 1 Television. On The Point of View, we pick the right topics, get the right guests, and ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. We have a two-in-one show for you tonight. We're reflecting on the very sad occurrences around the 6th of February when a 29-year-old engineer died in an ambulance following the refusal of 3 of Ghana's key Accra hospitals from receiving him when he was in distress. We'll be discussing how to improve our national emergency response from the perspective of a person who works as a paramedic in an ambulance and also from a doctor's perspective. Later on, we speak to the CEO of Goldfields Group. They released their results for 2025, and I'll be speaking to the Chief Executive Officer later on in the show. We're interactive. We'll be back with the details. Stay with us.
What does it take to be Ghana's most useful technology company? Is it the fact that we've been connecting businesses to their customers for over 20 years? Or that we power more than 12% of all electronic transactions in Ghana? Maybe it's that we are everywhere. From Accra to home. Maybe it's that we are everywhere. From Accra to home. Kumasi to Tadi. Cape Coast to Tamaru. Or is it that we safely process more transactions than any indigenous tech company here in Ghana? Or we did.
Now I have the number 7, 8, and the number 9.
You need number 10.
Please, I can't eat anymore.
I mean, number 10, liver salt.
The effective liver salt for the relief of stomach upset, heartburn, hyperacidity, and indigestion.
Would you like to try number 11?
What? JJ.
Number 10 liver salt. Refreshing relief, fast. Manufactured and distributed by Ernest Chemists Limited. This advert is FDA approved.
So a few weeks ago, the nation woke up to the sad story of a 29-year-old man whose family declared him missing because they hadn't found him for a couple of days. It was later found out that he had been killed by a motorbike that knocked him. He had been rescued by the ambulance service, tried to essentially save him. It did not work. Let's take you quickly into that to give you a sense of what happened before we speak to our guest in studio.
On Friday, 6th February, a 29-year-old Charles Emisa died following a hit-and-run crash at the Circle Overpass in Accra after reportedly being turned away by 3 major hospitals due to the unavailability of bed space. The victim was an engineer at Pomisado Ghana Limited. At 10:32 p.m., the ambulance service received a walk-in alert about the incident. According to the service, the crew mobilized a minute later and arrived at the scene 3 minutes later, where Emisa was found lying supine on the road with profuse bleeding. At 10:40 p.m., the ambulance departed for Police Hospital, arriving 3 minutes later. The facility reportedly declined to admit Emisa, citing no available beds. Even the offer to use the ambulance trolley was reportedly rejected. The crew then transported the patient to Ridge General Hospital, arriving at 10:58 p.m., where he was again refused admission. At 11:20 p.m., the ambulance reached Kolebu Teaching Hospital. Staff there allegedly instructed the crew to continue to the University of Ghana Medical Center. While still at Kolebu, Emisa's condition deteriorated and he went into cardiac arrest. CPR was administered immediately but was unsuccessful. A doctor on duty later certified him dead and instructed the ambulance crew to convey the body to the mortuary. The EMS team transported the body at 12:50 a.m., handing it over to the appropriate authorities at 12:53 a.m. The Deputy Director of the Ambulance Service, Simons Yusuf Kibra, confirmed the sequence of events to City News. He also lamented the negative impact of the no-bed syndrome on their work. He further called on health authorities to find lasting solutions to the challenge.
So everything brought down to the no-bed syndrome. So it's something that we are facing. But this particular issue, it is an emergency case that happened at a spot, and we need immediate attention. We don't provide holistic medical care. First is to provide in hospital. So ensure that the person gets to a facility for further treatment. So if we get them there's no bed, in fact, it makes our work very less. So we always appeal and we want the government to at least a percentage of at the emergency ward.
There are also reports that some of these hospitals deliberately refuse to accept the person due to the condition of the person and not necessarily because they aren't bed. Has that come to the attention of the ambulance service as well?
That's one, I cannot establish that. And then because of all this, that is why the minister has established and has formed a committee to look into this matter.
So to break down what happened and also what we can do as a nation for this type of no bed situation never to repeat itself, I have in the studio Martin Ewua Amwa, who is the clinical auditor Southern Zone for the National Ambulance Service. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So you are a clinical auditor, but you're actually a paramedic too.
Yes, a paramedic by profession, but my job assignment in the National Ambulance Service is a clinical auditor.
A clinical auditor. I'm sure you explained that.
Yes.
Thank you. We also have Nana Gansa Dazi, who is I call him a public health intellectual, but he's a medical doctor, but he helps us a lot with some of his advocacy within the public sphere, and indeed he's contributed to some of the work Occupy Ghana has been doing when it comes to public health in Ghana. Nana, thanks for joining us. Good evening.
Good evening.
Wonderful. I don't know if I described you correctly. I say you're a public intellectual in the health space, although you're a doctor as well, because of all your writings. Is that a good description?
Maybe.
Wonderful.
I'm first and foremost just a clinician, so.
Wonderful. I remember in 2018 when a 70-year-old man died after 7 hospitals refused him. You helped us craft a very important petition to the then president. At the time there were only 54 ambulances in Ghana. To think that now we have over 300 and people are still dying from no bed syndrome, I'm sure you must be wondering how are we still at this stage?
It's not surprising because we haven't done all the things we need to do.
We'll get into the details shortly. Let me start with so just to be clear, how many staff and ambulances do we have? What is the sort of the strength of our national ambulance system?
All right, thank you for that question. So we have a staff strength close to 4,000 currently, and the National Ambulance Service operates the Anglo-American system of EMS, which involves what we call the scoop and run system. So the scoop and run system is such a way that when you are called to an emergency, the emergency medical technicians or paramedics, when they get on scene, they take care of the initial stabilization of the patient, not just scooping and running, but they take care of the initial stabilization of the patient, i.e. includes like bleeding control procedures, oxygen administration, and several immobilization of fractures, several procedures, CPR, performing CPR on patients in cardiac arrest, and make sure that you stabilize the patient and you initiate transport to definitive care.
Amazing.
For that patient.
So how many people would be manning one ambulance unit?
So ideally we are supposed to have like 3 personnel or practitioners on board, including the driver, who is equally an EMT trained to give care to patients. So ideally we have 3 personnel on board, but at the minimum you have 2 personnel.
And the driver will always be a paramedic as well?
Yes, also a paramedic trained.
As well. So how many ambulances do you have in Ghana?
Currently we have 318 stations, but currently we have 191 in commission.
191
in commission and our 127 out of commission. due
Wow.
to
So 127 are not working.
Yes, obvious reason,
Wow.
because the ambulance has a lifespan of 5 years. So
And they've been in
these
operation
were-
some since 2019, some since 2020.
Yes, so after 5 years, there should be steps to replace those ambulances. Else, like any other vehicle, high maintenance issues or cropping, if you are not able to get a new fleet to replace the old ones.
So we have 191 official ambulances.
Out of commission temporarily. Some may be permanent, but some are temporary. So
you said 127 are not working,
are not,
but 191 are working.
Are functional.
Are working.
Functional as we speak today.
What must a functional ambulance have?
Yes, functional ambulance should have at the minimum a stretcher, wheel stretcher, where you put the patient to perform procedures on the patient. You should have at least an oxygen delivery system on board. You should have some basic stabilization tools like immobilization equipments. You should have an AED to resuscitate somebody who goes into cardiac arrest. We have airway agents to help stabilize someone's airway, especially an unconscious patient, to make sure that the person is able to maintain an airway. So you should have basic life supporting equipment on board. That makes it an ambulance and differentiates it from any other vehicle, because when a person is assumed that when somebody is picked in an ambulance, the person is given some level of care depending on the type of staff that you have on board. As I started by saying earlier, we have different levels of training. You have the emergency medical technicians. We have the advanced emergency medical technician level, and we have the paramedic level. We have 3 levels. So depending on the quality, the kind of staff that you have on board the ambulance will determine how more equipment that you need to add on. So the sophistication of the equipment will depend on the kind of procedures that can be performed on that particular type of ambulance.
I see. And so you yourself, what are you?
So I am a paramedic. I'm a paramedic by training. I trained in the United States of America, specifically Florida. Currently, the country is not running a paramedic program in the country. So for somebody to be able to practice as a paramedic, you need to go outside and study there and come back.
So you're a paramedic?
I'm a paramedic by
So
training.
which means you can man an ambulance unit?
Yes, I do man an ambulance unit.
All right. You described what was in an ambulance, and that an ambulance is not just pick people and send them to a place. It's a health system and a unit. So that's different from a taxi conveying somebody to a hospital.
Exactly.
But beyond that, how do you work generally when you pick somebody up and the person is distressed, maybe bleeding, and you stabilize the person? What do you do?
All right, so the EMS structure is made up of what we call the dispatch center. You have the dispatch center where the calls come in of emergency, a distress call received from people, and once that call is received, the dispatcher will give some we call advanced directives to those people concerned. If somebody is having a challenge or ill health, the dispatcher has ability. The dispatchers are also equally trained as emergency medical technicians. They have the capacity to give you some guidelines to stabilize the scene before they attach an ambulance to that particular call. So yes, when the ambulance receives or a particular station is attached to a call, they respond and get to the scene. When they get to the scene, they ensure safety of the scene. They assess the patient, see what is going on with the patient, then initiate initial interventions to stabilize the patient. Then ultimately the patient has to be transported to a hospital for definitive treatment.
All right. Do you, as a team, when you stabilize a patient and determine that the patient needs further treatment, do you have to establish contact with a health facility in situ prior to moving to the facility?
Yes, so that is part of our operations. You are supposed to alert the receiving facility that you intend to send the patient to, so that primarily for them to be prepared to receive that patient. So when you look at the 2012 referral guidelines, it's from the Ministry of Health, you see that no patient should, with an emergency, should be refused care without first being given any kind of first aid or that matter. So basically they are supposed to receive any patient that you bring in with any kind of condition, any ill health or any kind of injury. But the issue is they need to first, you need to ensure that they are prepared ahead of your coming. You need to inform the facility that you intend to transport the patient to, so that they will have the relevant professionals on board ahead of your arrival at the facility.
So you definitely have to call them ahead of time, or make contact with them in some way.
Yes.
Before you set off.
If the network allows. But we are all aware that in some parts of this country, you try to make calls and might not go through. And at that moment, the question is, what do? You can only do the initial stabilization and transport to definitive care. So at the end of the day, the question is, do the facilities have to accept when the cases are brought in? But as I said earlier, the referral policy from the Ministry of Health in 2012 makes it very clear that every emergency should, first of all, be not be turned away without first establishing or giving some first aid of a sort to that patient before.
And lastly, before I come to Nana, Dr. Nana, are there a list of facilities that can receive emergency cases, or can you decide to send them to the nearest hospital? How does it work?
All right, so basically we are supposed to do the initial stabilization when you get on scene and transport the patient to the closest appropriate facility. So all the EMTs or emergency medical technicians within a particular jurisdiction have an idea of the facilities that have the various capabilities. So for instance, if I'm working in Greater Accra, I know the facility that can have an emergency surgery done on a patient. So if I pick a patient who is in need of that urgent care, I know that this is where I have to route this patient to. So we have a fair idea. Every emergency medical technician within a particular area is conversant with the various facilities around within their catchment area and the capabilities.
Which means you would also have a working relationship with those facilities.
Yes.
They would know, because if I'm an ambulance based in Mampong, I would know the hospital, the biggest hospital there, because we've probably worked. So we know each other.
Definitely.
We are not strangers.
Definitely. Because when you talk about the EMS setup, the EMS includes the dispatcher, it includes what you call the first responder system, which fortunately the government of the day has been able to train the latter part of last year, middle of last year to the end of last year, train 6,000 what we call community medical first responders, which is generally referred to as first responders. So what they do is they are within the communities where when there are any emergencies, they will just initiate the initial first aid procedures, awaiting for the ambulance to arrive. Once the ambulance arrives, they hand over the patient to the ambulance crew, and the ambulance crew continues from there, and they give care as they transport the patient to the closest appropriate facility. And it includes the staff of the emergency department.
Okay.
The EMS setup includes the staff of the emergency department. So,
all right.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Gansa, I want to run through quickly the situational report of the road traffic crash that occurred on the 6th of February. The reason I don't want to ask Mr. Amwa to comment is I don't want him to be a judge in his own court. This was obviously produced by people who work within his organization. But I'm just going to read it to remind viewers of what happened, and also just take your general thoughts as a clinician on what happened, and then we can get into some specific recommendations. So the details will be put on the screen, but basically at 22:32, ambulance 15 received a walk-in call to attend to an emergency road traffic crash at the Circle Overpass. A minute later, the ambulance mobilized to the scene. That's 22:33. 22:35, ambulance arrives at the scene. So that's 3 minutes between the walk-in call and the arrival. At the same 35, Charlie Watch crew responded to a suspected, at the time I thought it was 48-year-old male trauma patient involved in a motor crash, hit and run, they describe it. A minute after, the crew made contact with the casualty. Upon arrival, patient was found lying supine on the road with a profuse bleeding from a deep shoulder laceration. Initial assessment was done. They give the details, pulse, everything else, and then they describe the intervention. EMS crew controlled bleeding using a gauze bandage, applied a cervical collar, log rolled the patient onto a spine board, and loaded him into the ambulance. Oxygen therapy was initiated. via nasal prongs at 4 liters per minute. Vital signs were monitored every 5 minutes. So this is 22:36. By 22:40, ambulance mobilized with patient to police hospital. So that's just 4 minutes later. 22:43, 3 minutes later, they arrived at police hospital, but patient was rejected due to unavailability of beds. Crew offered the use of the ambulance trolley. However, staff stated there was no space within the facility. So this is 43. 22:53, 10 minutes later, crew mobilized to reach General Hospital. 22:58, crew arrives at Reed Medical Hospital. Patient was again rejected for the same reason as above. 23:15, 17 minutes later, crew mobilized to Kolebu Teaching Hospital. 23:20, 5 minutes after they mobilized, arrived at Kolebu. Patient was rejected and crew advised to continue transport to UGMC. Due to the deterioration of the patient's condition, the crew objected to further transportation and explained that continued movement could place the patient in a dangerous situation. Despite several negotiations, the patient was still refused. No hospital staff attended to the casualty, nor were vital signs taken. The crew continued monitoring the patient for approximately 30 minutes, during which the patient went into cardiac arrest. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation was immediately initiated but yielded no positive outcome. The patient presented with fixed dilated pupils, cold skin temperature, and showed no signs of life despite several resuscitation attempts. Then they mentioned a doctor who was on duty came to certify the patient dead and instructed the crew to convey the body to the mortuary. And of course, EMS crew mobilized, sent the patient to the mortuary, and the rest is history. I'm reading this not to distress the family, but it's a public interest matter, and I believe that if we don't go through our systems, we will not improve. And I'm asking you, as somebody who's been very interested in this, listening to this, what are your initial thoughts? What are your reflections?
I first want to say thank you to Mr. Samoa and all the work he's doing, working as an EMS in Ghana. It's not easy. I'm an anesthesiologist, so I kind of know what he does. To be honest, it's indefensible. It really, really is indefensible. You can make as many excuses as you want about lack of beds, lack of equipment, lack of morale, apathy, but that's a human life. A 29-year-old, and hour and a half, that guy could have been saved. And it could have been something as simple as a tension pneumothorax that killed him. And all he needed maybe was a needle into his chest to release the air. It could have been, it was salvageable. 1.5 hours, something could have been done for him. And even if something was done and he didn't make it, you can argue that they tried, but it's really indefensible. As a physician, I can't defend this.
When you look at the conduct of the EMS team, the ambulance team, and based on the report they've given, was that standard from, as a clinician, just reading what they've written? If it's true, would you say that they acquitted themselves well?
Oh yes, they did. I mean, Bernard, if you look back 8 years ago where we were with 54 ambulances, I mean, if you look at the timeline, I was shocked when I read that there was an ambulance close to Circle and they responded in the time they did. I was blown away. And they acquitted themselves really, really well. And the guy had polytrauma. So polytrauma is where you often see that in car accidents, where you have several injuries. The guy had polytrauma. There was very little they could have done for him. You know, he could have died from several things: bleed in his head, torn vessels in his chest, a hole in his lung that causes what we call a tension pneumothorax. He could have ruptured his spleen. He could have ruptured his liver. He could have been bleeding profusely somewhere in his body. There was nothing they could have done but try to get him to the best place for care, which they did. You look at the timeline. I mean, they hustled to save this guy's life, and I mean, they can really feel happy about what they did and how they tried to save this guy.
So when we started this advocacy 8 years ago, we had only 54 ambulances. Obviously, the government procured about 307. Now we have 191. It seems to me as if a functioning emergency system is much more than having a lot of ambulances. Okay, so can you just walk me through a bit when we say a functioning emergency system, what are its components? Just basic. What should it have?
So the emergency, I call it emergency response service, right? So it's massive if you really think of it. You cover medical emergencies, but you also cover something like crashes. Think of the helicopter crash that took the life of all those statesmen. It covers natural disasters. So it encompasses all these disasters, external and internal, that can affect the society. Now, that's really, really broad. And when we bring it down to the medical system, you need the ambulances, and you need the hospitals that would take care of these cases, and you need the EMTs and the paramedics who would take care of these patients at the initial point. But most important thing is you need a brain for this system, what I call a command center. And that is what is lacking as we try to improve. So the command center would, let's take the case of this poor gentleman who passed. The paramedics get there, they look at this patient. From their training, they recognize immediately this is a polytrauma. So they need to get this patient to a hospital which can deal with polytrauma, because you are dealing with like you can tell, an hour, 2 hours, right? So then they call the command center. This is unit whatever. We had circle with a gentleman who was hit by a car. It's a polytrauma. Where can we take him? The command center has a list of hospitals that can deal with polytrauma and the beds they have. And they reach out to that hospital. We have a polytrauma coming from Circle. Can you take him? And they said, yes, we can. Or we can't. Try this other place. And so they try, let's say, Hospital B, which they, let's say, Ray says, oh, yes, we can take him. But we want Kolibu to take 2 of our patients who are recovering. So Kolibu says, okay. So they make beds free, and this patient ends up in Ridge. That is that little piece that is missing, that command center bed, right? And just like we've improved quite a bit with ambulances, that command center would take us another step up. And I think that is what the government should really, really concentrate on now. There's another thing that I would want to talk about, but we can reach that later.
Yes, so you're saying that the brain of the service is a center that can see facilities, beds available, and sort of match demand with supply. That's the kind of thing you're talking about.
Exactly. Now also, another step would be centers of excellence, right? So you have the command center, that is sort of the brain of the action. But you also have centers of excellence, and this is what I mean. You couldn't take this gentleman from one hospital to the next. He needed to go to a center that could treat polytrauma. He needed to go quickly, right? So it would be good to have a center for polytrauma, so the paramedics know where to take him exactly and immediately. You could have a center for heart attacks and strokes, so then they know as soon as they see this patient is having a heart attack, they go there, they call the command center directs them there immediately. You could have a center for poisoning, so when you have a patient who you think may be poisoned, you take them there immediately. You have a center for obstetric care. So you have a patient who you think is having an obstetric emergency, you take them there immediately. So this is another consideration. The third one, and Mr. Amo will probably agree with me, as what are emergencies, right? So emergency endangers your life or your limb. And there are a lot of people walking into accident emergencies across the country who really don't belong there, right? And so creating these centers will also allow these hospitals to tease out these cases that don't really fit there into lesser hospitals. So they free space and beds for the true emergencies, of which we have quite a few.
This is the point of view. We are reflecting on the very sad death of a 29-year-old engineer whose death has shocked the nation and also led to 2 inquiries. The Ministry of Health say they are investigating how 3 hospitals refused him treatment. The Health Facilities Regulatory Authority, HEFRA, have also instituted an investigation. I am in studio with Martin Ewua Amua, who is a clinical auditor in the Southern Zone. He's a paramedic. And I also have Nana Dazi Gansa on the show. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
For the past 15 years, St. Thomas Eye Hospital has been setting the pace in Ghana's eye care landscape. In 2011, we became one of the first hospitals to introduce modern phaco surgeries, commonly called laser cataract surgeries, to Ghana. In 2013, again, we became the first eye hospital to start advanced retina detachment surgeries, macular hole surgeries, and other complex vitreoretinal procedures using the MIVS surgical approach. This year, we have set a new pace in glaucoma care with the launch of our advanced twin-star SLT-YAG combo laser, giving the glaucoma patients enhanced options in managing their conditions. We are a premier ophthalmic group practice with 11 specialist eye surgeons working together and leveraging technology to advance eye care in Ghana. We have 4 branches in Accra, Tema, and Kumasi. You may call us on 024-686-6580 or visit our website at www.stthomaseyehospital.com. St. Thomas Eye Hospital, providing excellence in eye care.
The Ghana Exim Bank is 10 years old. Hooray! And to commemorate this milestone, the Ghana Exim Bank is hosting a 2-day international conference on the theme, A Decade of Enabling Export Trade and Industrial Transformation, Resetting Gexim for the Next Frontier. The event takes place on the 24th to 26th of March at the Kempinski Hotel, Gold Coast City, 8 a.m. each day. President of the Republic, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, will perform the official opening of the conference. Special guest and speaker, Honorable Elizabeth Ofuswejari, Minister for Trade, Agribusiness and Industry. Conference host is Honorable Sylvester Adina Mensah, Chief Executive of the Ghana Exim Bank. For inquiries, call 0208-541-480 or visit eximbankghana.com/conference to register. Media partners, Daily Graphic, Media General, The Multimedia Group, City FM, Radio Gold and Channel 1 TV. And knowledge partners include IFC and SME Finance Forum.
Welcome back. We're still reflecting on the death of Charles Emisa on February the 7th. Paramedics from the ambulance service did their best to save him. 3 hospitals refused essentially to take him. This issue of we will not take a patient because of no bed is not new to you.
Yes.
In your work, I don't know, how do you deal with that? So do you just keep going to hospitals until they accept you? How do you manage to get a patient into a hospital when they keep saying no bed?
Unfortunately, that's the bitter truth. The bitter truth is we keep experiencing such situations whereby you get to a facility, you think should be able to accept a case, and they tell you that there is no bed. And what we do, sometimes the reluctance of releasing the bed, because once you release your patient with the bed, it means that you have decommissioned the ambulance. The ambulance cannot go back to the community it serves to attend to another emergency. So most of the times that would be something that we normally don't want to do, because once you do that, the ambulance becomes decommissioned. So the last option for us to do is to release the bed to you and tell you that we are ready to release the bed. And with this kind of negotiation, we have seen situations whereby after releasing your bed, people who travel from one region to another transferring a patient there will have to be there for hours
to wait for
the
patient to move on to a regular bed.
To a regular hospital bed before their ambulance stretcher is given back to them for them to return back to the wherever they came from, and they go through a lot of hardship and a lot of situations which are very
it's not ideal for the ambulance to offer its bed, but in the case that we referenced, the team offered that the hospital should even treat the patient within the ambulance.
Yes, because they saw the gravity of the condition of the patient and they realized that they needed the patient to be seen. Because if you, as Doc rightly mentioned, if you have a patient with polytrauma, bleeding from different sources, the ambulance can do initial stabilization, but there is a limit to which the ambulance can provide care. When it gets to a point, you have something called the golden hour, from the time of injury to the time the patient arrives at the facility on a surgical table. So you want to look at that timeline and make sure that this patient who has a polytrauma is able to get to definitive care as soon as you can after the initial stabilization procedures. But if that happens, that's why they were ready to offer their ambulance stretcher, which we are not very comfortable doing because you decommission the ambulance. But because they realized the gravity of the condition of this patient, they realized that there was a need for this patient to immediately receive some definitive treatment to be able to survive.
Based on the guidelines you referred to, the 2012 guidelines, ideally what should have happened when the patient was sent to any of the hospitals, having had your team stabilize the patient and administered the first level of care? Based on those guidelines, what ought to have happened?
So yes, ideally once they stabilized, initial stabilization, and transported the patient to the facility, the patient should have been initially triaged. Okay, they should have tried the patient to see where the patient was at as far as stability is concerned and see whether they can initiate some initial stabilization procedures to maintain the patient at a very good spot before they can decide to refer the patient to another facility. So there was a need for that initial stabilization procedures. It might include things like, for instance, if there is a deep laceration or there is a cut on any major vessel, they can just go ahead and be able to suture those vessels, and that will prevent any further blood loss. They can even go into considering even blood transfusion on this patient. That will also help to stabilize the patient, and from that point they could have decided to let the patient be sent to another facility. And with this being said, it means that the initial procedures to maintain the patient's life has already been ensured. So for such a patient, the ambulance crew could have transported to another facility.
So when they say triaging should be done, that triaging is without prejudice to whether there's a bed or not, correct?
Yes, so because the ambulance stretcher is available, you can do examination on the ambulance stretcher, even in the ambulance, and take the baseline vital signs, do the initial assessment, and form an impression about the patient, and know that this patient, where this patient is at, if I don't do ABC, and I allow this crew to go further with this patient, the patient might not make it. So if you do that initial triage, it gives you an impression of that patient and know whether that patient is stable enough to go to another facility. That is what the initial
Dr. Dazi, some doctors say to me, I misunderstand the way they work. So if when I criticize doctors for not or when I criticize the health facility for not accepting this patient, I reveal I don't understand what is really happening within the system, because they're saying the no bed syndrome is code for a much deeper problem. They say, for example, that if a patient dies on your hands, there's a lot of things that happen. Help me understand from a doctor's perspective where I could be going wrong in that view, because I didn't really get it. But a lot of doctors keep saying to me that, look, you need to tread cautiously in this your criticism of the health facility for saying no. So I just want to understand. I'm not sure if you agree with them, but just explain.
I totally get it, Bennett. It's that's why in my first statement I said it's indefensible, even if, right? So how do I put this easily? Ghanaian hospitals are not well equipped, and sometimes patients will die on you and you'll be helpless to help them. It's a horrible feeling. And over time, some medical professionals who flee the country to escape that feeling. Some would become callous. Some would leave the profession. So it's not a good place to be. Now, when you take on an emergency that you know you cannot help, you know as a doctor that we can't help this guy. Do you still want to take him and go through this very horrible process of watching somebody die? Right? That is one. Two, that whole thing of this patient is going to need a lot of care. And do we really want to commit a bed to this patient who probably cannot even pay? So I'm giving you sort of the background of this. Who cannot even pay? Do we really want to commit the bed to that? The third thing is resources. I mean, this is going to take a lot of resources. Do we want to commit to that? Another thing with the no bed thing is, oftentimes it's not even the doctors who tell the ambulance crew there's no bed. It could be an orderly, it could be a nurse. I mean, it's not structured at all, right? So all these things play a role. But if I could go back in 1986 and 87, two doctor groups in Cook County in Chicago wrote a paper. They wrote two papers, one in 87, one in 86. And they talked about the phenomenon of dumping. They saw a lot of private hospitals were dumping patients to Cook County, which is one of the bigger community county hospitals in the country. And so basically, if you went to a private hospital and they saw you a minority or you don't have insurance, they just told you, we couldn't take care of you, and go to Cook County. And the federal government got involved and passed the law called EMTALA. And EMTALA basically is, let me see if I can, Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, right? So they passed EMTALA. And EMTALA basically means that if a patient walks into your hospital, even if the patient collapses in front of your hospital, you're supposed to do three things. You're supposed to screen this person because of an emergency, stabilize them, and either admit them or send them to a facility that can take care of them. Failure to do this would cost the hospital anywhere from $50,000 to $129,000. The physician on call would get charged pretty much the same thing. And you'll be kicked off the Medicare. Medicare is the largest government insurance in the U.S. and it's a financial blow. You also get a visit from the Inspector General of the CMS, and Bernard, believe me, you don't want the Inspector General of the CMS in your hospital. It's not fun. And then come the civil suits from the family. So EMTALA has changed that massively, this behavior, and I think Ghana needs such a law. In the sub-region, Kenya has such a law, South Africa, even Nigeria, Mozambique, and Uganda all have these laws that ensure that if a patient walks into an ER, they get care. It's about human life, and irrespective of what kind of stress you are under, you have to give your best. I know I get Ghanaian doctors and where they come from and how frustrating it is sometimes to watch a patient die and not be able to do anything. But I don't think the general public can put themselves in their shoes. I wish they could. And so then it's incumbent upon the medical community to do its best. And that's only thing you can really do. So to probably summarize, I get where they are coming from, but you're dealing with human life, and human life matters. And we need a law that ensures that this is done. And I think it's easy to craft this. And then thirdly, if you are going to have this law, then the government should also make sure that physicians and nurses have the equipment and the staff necessary to stabilize and take care of patients. And also hospitals have to make sure that not anybody at all can tell an ambulance crew that there are no beds. There's no reason an orderly should be able to tell the ambulance crew there's no bed. There's no reason a nurse should be able to do that. I mean, that's something the CEO of the hospital should know. Somebody high in administration should make that call, not an orderly.
We'll leave it here. Thank you, Nana Dazi Gansa, who's originally an anesthesiologist, but of course a clinician with a lot of experience in health care. I'll take a final comment from you. How encouraged or discouraged are your team after what happened on February 7 with all the controversy?
I think that we try to get them some kind of psychological help, because there's something called post-traumatic stress disorder. When people go through some of these situations and handle such cases, when they come back, we have a psychology team that we send them there to kind of help them to get over some of these emotional traumas that they go through. So that's the way we are trying to help them to get back on their feet, because seeing a life just slip out of your hands sometimes can be very traumatizing. So we just give them those psychological help to try to bring them back on their feet.
So a big thank you to our two guests who have brought to us some very important recommendations around the need for a central command center to manage emergencies, and also a law to make it impossible for hospitals to say no bed. We're speaking to Nana Dazi Gansa, who's a health professional with many years of experience, and also speaking to Martin Ewa Amua, who's from the ambulance service. When we come back, we switch to something completely different. I'll be speaking to the group CEO of Goldfields, Mike Fraser, on their 2025 results. He has some very interesting to say about Ghana as a mining destination and what the results mean for the future of Ghana's gold. Stay with us.
To Malcolm, where shopping is a musical experience for all generations. Granny's, let's roll it back.
Malcolm got now we did for you. Malcolm's got it all for me and you. Sales and discounts, we tell about a distance. Bring back home the experience we did for you. Life made so easy peasy, lemon squeezy, shopping made easy. Sometimes money due, sometimes some way out of pocket. We got you where everything, we got it all right here. Malcolm's easy. The price is right. The price is right. The price is nice. The price is nice. Fresh with the vibes, unbeatable. If the price be fight, if the price be fight. Come for the views. Come for the views. Come for the likes. Come for the likes. Everything you do want under one roof. Even come for the ride. Oh yeah, come for the ride. Number one stop shop, number one. Your number one stop shop, Malcolm. Your number one stop shop, number one. Your number one stop shop, Malcolm. Malcolm got now we did for you. Malcolm's got it all for me.
No matter the generation you belong to, Malcolm is where Ghana shops.
Bring back home the experience we did for you.
Bring home the experience.
For the past 15 years, St. Thomas Eye Hospital has been setting the pace in Ghana's eye care landscape. In 2011, we became one of the first hospitals to introduce modern phaco surgeries, commonly called laser cataract surgeries, to Ghana. In 2013, again, we became the first eye hospital to start advanced retina detachment surgeries, macular hole surgeries, and other complex vitreoretinal procedures using the MIVS surgical approach. This year, we have set a new pace in glaucoma care with the launch of our advanced Twin Star SLT-YAG combo laser, giving the glaucoma patients enhanced options in managing their conditions. We are a premier ophthalmic group practice with 11 specialist eye surgeons working together and leveraging technology to advance eye care in Ghana. We have 4 branches in Accra, Tema, and Kumasi. You may call us on 024-686-6580 or visit our website at www.stthomaseyehospital.com. St. Thomas Eye Hospital, providing excellence in eye care.
Are you ready to revolutionize the future of agriculture? The Ministry of Trade, Agribusiness and Industry, in partnership with the Ghana Exim Bank, proudly presents the Ghana Agrotech Fair 2026. The fair will feature exhibitions, market linkages, masterclasses, and workshops on climate-smart farming, digital tools, and export development. Join us at the Black Star Square from March 17 to March 19 at 9 a.m. each day. The President of the Republic, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, will be assisted by the Minister for Trade, Agribusiness and Industry, the Honorable Elizabeth Ofuswejari, and the Chief Executive of the Ghana Exim Bank, Honorable Sylvester Adina Mensah, to open the fair. Government agencies, agrotech firms, startups, farmers, financial institutions, and the general public are all welcome. To exhibit or for inquiries, call 0559 679326 or 0242 585419. Ghana Agrotech Fair 2026, transforming agribusiness through local innovation and technology.
We're now happy to be joined by the Group CEO of Goldfields, Mike Fraser, who's just released the 2025 end-of-year results, to talk to us about how he sees those results and the outlook for 2026. Mike, thanks for joining us here in Accra. Good morning.
Good morning, Bernard. Good to be with you today.
How would you describe the 2025 results?
Look, I think for us, we believe it was a very solid contribution from our teams across the globe. I think first and foremost, I'd like to say what was most pleasing is that we were able to keep people safe and everyone could go home safe and well at the end of every day. And that's something that really keeps us focused every single day. But apart from that, I think we were really pleased with the operational delivery from our teams across the globe. We were able to deliver an increase of 18% in our production year on year compared to 2024. That was delivered by strong contributions from across the globe. The impact of our ramp up of our assets, Salares Norte and Chile, certainly assisted in diluting the impact of inflationary costs that we've been seeing across the globe. And therefore our costs were only up 3% at a portfolio level across the business. I think the other thing that was pleasing is obviously the increase in capital returns to shareholders.
How much did Ghana contribute to this good performance?
Yeah, so Ghana is an important part of our portfolio. The Tarkwa asset in particular is a cornerstone asset in our portfolio, and we were able to deliver nearly 475,000 ounces of gold produced during the year. That was slightly lower than the prior year, so we saw gold production down compared to 2024, but that was largely because we were prioritizing a significant amount of waste capital development in the mine, and so whilst our total tons moved were slightly lower year on year, we had a significantly lower amount of ore mined. That meant that we used lower grade stockpiles to feed through the mill, and that delivered the lower production ounces. But having said that, it was again a continued strong contribution from the team. What was also important for the year is that we delivered a new life of mine plan, which supports our lease extension for our Tarkwa asset. And that was a significant amount of work done by our teams on site to deliver a really good outlook for Tarkwa going forward.
So in terms of the life of mine plan, should I understand that to mean Tarkwa has a longer life ahead of it in terms of its production capacity? Can you elaborate a bit on how you see Tarkwa behaving in the next few years?
Yes, absolutely. And so what we did with Tarkwa is we actually lifted our reserves by around 3.1 million ounces with the announcement that we put out in November following the revised life of mine plan. This was important is that it lifted our production life from around 8 years to over 20 years of life. And that was important because what we wanted to demonstrate with our application on the lease renewal is that with the right horizon on this asset and with the right amount of reinvestment, we were able to create a much longer horizon for the asset. And that in turn creates a lot of other opportunities to continue to reinvest, to potentially then lift production even further for this asset. So that was a really important piece of work that we were busy with last year.
And in terms of optimism from the government of Ghana's side, whether your application for extension of lease will be successful, how optimistic are you?
Look, I believe very positively that we are working in a very collaborative way with the government around this lease. I think it's quite clear and uncontested that Goldfields has made a very positive contribution to the economy as well as to society in Ghana over many decades. And certainly we are pleased with our position there because it aligns with our purpose of making a positive impact in the societies in which we operate. So we absolutely believe that we can continue to make a contribution and a positive contribution in Ghana for decades to come. And it's quite clear that in Ghana at the moment there is an expectation of a constructive dialogue about how we can increase participation and increase the contribution that the sector provides to people of Ghana. And we feel confident that our track record speaks about our intentions and what we will try and do going forward. So I'm positive. I know that we're one of the first large renewals that is coming to government for discussion. And I think as we're getting clarity about mining policy, a lot of that will play into this lease renewal process. But with that, we're having positive dialogues, and I'm positive that we will find the right pathway together for the benefit of the people of Ghana.
You usually assess a year on safety, operational, and finance. And on all three, you seem very happy. How much of your financial performance was based on the behavior of the gold price over the last quarter, at least, of the previous year?
Yeah, so look, if you look at it across the group, I would say, probably two kind of relevant statistics. So the gold price was up around 60% year on year on average. But what we did see is that our cash flows were up nearly 5 times year on year. So this is the benefit that gold companies and gold producers actually provide for investors, is that leveraged exposure to the gold price. You can go and buy gold and get a certain return, and we still believe that gold is going to be an important investment allocation opportunity. But gold companies that deliver safe, reliable, and predictable outcomes certainly will outperform underlying gold just because of that inherent leverage that you have.
But does the higher price of gold in the past few months portend anything for next year? Are you hoping to do more exploration and ramp up production because of the way the price is behaving?
Yeah, and what we did, Bernard, last year is we actually went to the market in November preemptively and put a 5-year outlook in place for our business. And we looked at every single one of our operations and said, what is the opportunity, given these high gold prices, to really set these assets up for the long term? And what is important in our attitude is that we recognize that actually reinvesting in existing assets is equally as important as going and finding out the assets for the next generation. And that's why, if you bring it close to home in Ghana, that opportunity to relook at Tarkwa and find ways to extend life by increasing investment and unconstraining the asset is important for us. And that's what we were able to deliver. So that was the mindset that we brought. We were able to do that across a number of operations in our portfolio. And then in addition, we'll continue to do additional exploration to see where those next resources are coming from.
But generally, are you expecting the price of gold to keep going up or behaving the way it is, looking at geopolitical issues, uncertainties around the independence of the US Fed, and the fact that a lot more central banks are buying gold, what's your own price outlook and how does that feed into other plans?
Look, that's a really good question, and it's really important not to get caught up in the hype of where gold prices are at. So whilst personally and as a company we do believe that gold prices will remain at elevated levels for longer, it's equally important that we apply moderation in how we think about the outlook. So what we typically use is consensus prices, and if you look at consensus prices today in the long term, this is around $3,300. So we do believe that gold isn't always going to be at these levels, and therefore it's important that when we make investment decisions, and equally the same conversation goes to governments, when you're making structural reforms like we're talking about at the moment, think about the business in the long term and the long-term sustainability of the industry. And that's what we do when we think about investments in our business. So everything needs to be able to create a return and be sustainable at consensus long-term prices, not just being swayed by the price of the day.
Let's come to some Ghana-specific questions, if you may, briefly. Of course, you lost Damai, and we know the history of that. I don't want to go into all the details. But there appears to be two key issues in Ghana where there's a bigger appetite for local or government ownership or participation, and there's also expectation of higher royalties, leading to the so-called sliding scale royalty proposal. How do you interpret those two from where you sit?
No, and look, I think this is the inherent tension that you see with resources all over the world. And I think Ghana is absolutely going through the right conversation to say, how do we make sure there's an appropriate contribution of the sector to the people of Ghana, both through the fiscus as well as participation in the sector by local Ghanaians. So I think it's an absolutely appropriate conversation. But I think what we've got to do is look at where does success come. And success comes in the way that we actually create a healthy sector that provides a space for all players to participate. We are quite clear that if you look at assets like Tarkwa, which is a significant asset, it's got the potential, down the road to be one of the most significant gold mines in Africa. That does require participation from multiple parties. And I think what we can bring as a global miner is a balance sheet that can enable the long-term sustainability and the delivery of the potential of the asset. Equally, what we can do is bring skills, capabilities, and knowledge working with our local teams to actually make the best of the assets. And then what we can also do is enable the development of significant local capability, which we've also done in the decades past through the way that we've built up contractors. We've created significant opportunities for local Ghanaian enterprises. So a healthy ecosystem is one where we can actually work together, where we actually create an opportunity to bring foreign investment into the country, where we actually utilize the capabilities of global mining companies to create a more healthy sector together. So I don't think it's a threat. It's a healthy conversation, but the right one is where we can actually have all of these players working together to create a healthy sector. And if you just look at the countries around the world that have been successful, it's the ones that have been able to find that balance.
So you spoke about a 5-year plan and also your life of mine for Tarkwa. Clearly, you didn't anticipate a different royalty regime in those plans. So the so-called sliding scale royalty regime, what are your thoughts on that? Do you have an alternative proposal? What conversations are you having with the government in order to not to compromise the Tarkwa work, but also to strike that fine balance you referred to?
Yeah, and I think, first and foremost, I'd be quite clear that the message that we delivered to the minister, as well as, directly and as well through the chamber, we're not different in the industry view, that we feel that this royalty change is quite aggressive, and particularly if you look at it in a competitive lens in what the rest of the world does. And that's on the base of a fairly market-related tax regime. So this certainly puts Ghana at the high end of government receipts out of the sector. And I think, again, I come back to the point, my bigger concern is not what it does to the industry today, but what does it do in terms of future competitiveness of the industry. So that's kind of the general conversation that we've put forward. I mean, there's no doubt that the way that we've thought about TAQWA's success going forward, and I must just put it out there, that the government of Ghana are participants in TAQWA. So they own 10% of TAQWA today. And so our interests in some respects are aligned in how well we run the asset for the long term, not just for today. And when we think about the additional royalty, quite clearly it does change the relationship of the return. It means that the government increases their overall return out of this asset. But I think what we're also trying to do is to improve the competitiveness. So the things that we are doing on investing in the business to make it sustainable in the long term, by being able to improve the margins of this asset in the long term, that'll be largely offset by some of these royalty increases. But that just makes the need to improve TAQWA for the long term even more compelling to make it sustainable.
Two more questions before we wrap up. And Mike, thank you so much for your time. For the first time, Ghana's split between large-scale mined gold and small-scale mined gold has tipped in favor of small-scale. So even though it's around 49-51, so now we're mining more gold from small-scale, some of which are legal, some of which may be illegal. What do you make of that? Are you worried about that? What's your comment?
No, I think this is a really, really important strategic question for Ghana, and it's one that I've also had open conversations with the ministry around, and it's one that we have to work together on very clearly. And I look at the sector between, there's three parties in the way that I categorize it, and I think you see it the same way. We have large-scale formal miners, we have small-scale, either in the formal sector or outside the formal sector, and then we have the large illegal miners. I think what we've got to do is work together collaboratively to try and improve the performance, both environmentally and financially, of that informal sector, the small-scale sector. And what we've been doing is having a conversation through the ministry about saying, how do we bring the whole large-scale industry together with the small scale, with the refiners, with the gold board, with the World Gold Council, to actually put an entire system of support behind the small-scale sector to improve the capability and the returns out of that sector. So I think there's space for all of us. But if we can work together to improve that small-scale sector, we hopefully then diminish the impact and the influence of the illegal sector. So that's certainly a strategy that we are committed to and would like to be part of the solution. And I think with the capabilities that we have and the resources we have, we can do that. And it's not just about giving land up for small-scale miners, but actually bring real technical capability to improve yields, to improve the financial outcomes.
And do you see a role for the newly created gold board in all of this?
Yes, I do. I think they do have a role. I think what success is going to look like is where we all lean in, we all bring our unique contributions to make this a success. And it's not one lever that we have to pull.
Let's end with the foundation. The Goldfields Ghana Foundation, we are told, surpassed $109 million in cumulative community investment since its founding, cementing its position as the longest running and most capitalized mining foundation in Ghana. How proud of you are that, and what are your thoughts on its areas of emphasis? Infrastructure seems to still be its biggest share as compared to education and other things. What are your thoughts on the foundation's work and how that fits into the way communities see mining? Your closing thoughts on that?
Yeah. Thanks, Bernard. Look, I think for us, that is absolutely tied to our purpose. So the only way we make true impact is when our host communities feel a positive impact from our contribution. And so the Ghana Foundation does amazing work in improving the lived experience of people in our host communities. I know that the focus and the way that we engage through our foundation, we really work with our host communities to identify the priorities that are important to them for where our investments go. And you're quite right, a lot of the contribution has been in formal infrastructure and establishing infrastructure because that's been the requirements. But equally important, what's close to us is improving focus on things like education, health, things that are much more sustainable for individuals and not just the physical infrastructure around them. So certainly as we think about our contributions globally, health, education are certainly things that are high on our agenda.
Thank you, Mike, and congrats on a good end-of-year report for 2025.
Thank you, Bernard. Thanks for your time.
Wonderful. We've been speaking to Mike Fraser, who is the Group CEO for Goldfields. They have major investments in Ghana, the Takwa mine being the biggest. Of course, they had the Daman mine. The lease was not renewed. And as we read at the end, a lot of work they do in communities. So thanks for watching this segment of the show. We'll be right back. So that's all we have time for today's edition of the show. It's been a 2-in-1. In the first part, we took a look again at the unfortunate incident that led to the death of a 29-year-old man on the 7th of February. Speaking to Dr. Nana Dazi Gansa and Mr. Ewa Amwa, who is a paramedic with the ambulance service. Later on, we spoke to the CEO of Goldfields, Mike Fraser, on their 2025 results. Thanks for watching tonight's edition of the show. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Life, we discover why this American woman chose to move to the island of Crete. Sweet resemblance, a look at how this fluffy dessert came to mirror the Salzburg Mountains. And Southern flair, how the French city of Marseille offers visitors more than just postcard cliches. All this and more coming up on Euromax. Crete isn't just popular with tourists, it's also attracting more and more expats. What's it really like to build a new life on this Greek island paradise?